Guess who loves to do that? Paper Rex. What's up, everyone? It's time for another episode of What Would Chobra Do? And it's actually going to be back-to-back episodes because, unfortunately, not all the Pacific teams actually got through their groups in the first stage or in the first place. In fact, only DRX did. Surprise. Didn't think we were going to be seeing that. And the remaining three teams still have to go through either the elimination match or the decider match of their groups. So obviously the schedule starts to kind of crunch up here in Champions Seoul. So we're going to have to start to grind through a little bit. I am a little bit delayed on these videos. I just want to put a disclaimer out there because I was actually called in last minute for a couple days for the Korean analyst desk. Then I had like the Stormgate Tasteless TV showdown. I'm going to be working kind of some side events for VCT next week as well. So that's all great news, right? We're getting other work, but obviously that kind of puts a wrench in the plans of this whole thing of just grinding through VODs. So I'm still trying to keep up with it. But I also want to put out one more thing that we noticed after my last episode. And I mostly noticed this because DRX basically did what I said they shouldn't do, which was play Abyss and Lotus, which I think is still insane. But they adapted to what I think they should have adapted to, right? I identified that Fnatic is going to want to play this mid-range style, that you want to be able to kind of take certain rounds with contact plays. You want to really push up the line of scrimmage and then just kind of break them, right? Don't go into this whole util trade, util fight, because Fnatic will win out, especially on maps like Lotus where they just know it like the back of their hand. And they actually did that, but on the maps that Fnatic were going to be super comfy on. I mean, the Abyss, I guess you didn't really know what Fnatic was going to pull out, but they played it really well. And Fnatic, not to anyone's surprise, I think, played a very similar style of composition. And then on the flip side, we saw Team Heretics coming out really well prepped for Gen G. And I noted this when I was watch partying that match between Heretics and Gen G, where I said, I actually think I was going through my analysis, right, for What Would Chobra Do for the series with the assumption that Gen G was going to win. So it was much more like, hey, just block out these things, right? These are what they do. I was more focused about how do they normally attack so we can just defend it. But it wasn't so much how do we break through what they do. All right. On the flip side for DRX, while, I was very wrong on the map draft, and by the way, I mad respect to DRX. That is how you win. Clearly, I'm a coward. But what I want to say is for DRX, right, I was clearly analyzing from the point of view of, okay, how does DRX break Fnatic? Because they would need to, because I'm looking at DRX as the challenger here. But Team Heretics and Gen G, I was looking at Heretics as the challengers. So in my head, I think unconsciously, I was analyzing it in the viewpoint of, okay, how do you just block off what they usually do? But what if they don't do what they usually do? So this is an interesting thing. This is something that I think we're seeing as a trend as well, where a lot of these favorites, or the ones that are first seed, that have played a lot of maps but kind of got through with really good fundamentals, things like that, in their regional leagues or in their international leagues, I should say, have now not gone out as first in the group. In fact, not a single first seed of any region has gotten out of the groups yet. None of them are in playoffs. So it's a very interesting trend. It's what happens when you get the best of the best. And without further ado, now we will jump into today's episode, which is going to be about the upcoming matches later today, basically, for Talon and Paper Rex. Well, let's talk about the maps first, because this will help us kind of identify what you might want to look out for just a bit more. Now, there are obviously some question marks regarding, for instance, does Abyss go all the way through and things like that. But let's just talk about, okay, first of all, Vitality going for that Lotus ban shouldn't be too surprising. They were banning it out before as well. I think also you saw that even when the team claimed that there weren't a lot of strats prepped, etc. This is one of those maps that Premier just feels comfortable on. That's why they were willing to pick it when Premier first joined the team. And I think there's no reason to pick into that unless you think it's like, or at least leave it up open, unless it's your favorite map, right? So I can't imagine that they would be leaving that open. On the flip side, while Haven is also not a great map for Vitality, I don't think you're too scared about Talon first picking that blind coming into this match. So I imagine Vitality would go for the Lotus ban. And I think for Talon, no reason for you to kind of pick the Icebox either, because here's, again, going off the mindset of, okay, how do you make sure you target your opponents? From what we've seen, I think when you're playing kind of these back-to-back matches, it's about whoever has just prepped more, right? Yeah, there are some curveballs, etc., but those are a bit more Hail Marys, and that's like if you know you secure a map, things like that. And on that front, then I think you've seen what they do on Icebox, you've seen what they do on Bind, and we saw what they did on Sunset, and it continues to show kind of certain trends and styles that they play, but also certain tendencies that we're seeing currently in Champions. So no reason to pick the Icebox where you haven't shown your hand yet either, and I imagine, you know, while Talon loves to pride themselves in being prepped for everything, you just haven't had that much time with Primi. I also just do wonder what that map looks like with Primi. So, because it started to get really shaky towards the end of Stage 2. The reason I think you banned that out over any of the other maps is because you've seen the Ascent, and I think there are very, very strong tells from the Ascent, and I would actually love to see, because now you know that if you win, you're playing against Leviathan again. It's a rematch. So I mean, this is also a bit of a stretch, but if Talon is going through their trend of we have comps for days, right? If that's the narrative we're going for, I would love to see them play Ascent again with a different comp, hence making it tougher for Leviathan to decide what to do about that map when the rematch happens. Because they already played the zombie comp, the 9 lives comp, whatever you want to call it, against Leviathan. It was a pretty close match. Leviathan closes it out at the end of the day. So I would love to see that. Or maybe even just play that again, and then maybe you pull out the other one against Leviathan. Either way, I would love to see that. I think it would be, I would love for them to double down, because here's the thing, otherwise you're eliminated anyway. So I think you might as well. Next up, I mean, things like Sunset, etc. I don't know if you think that they are going to pick the Sunset into you, just because this is a map where the Neon could be played, and Governor's still very, very comfy on the Neon. I don't know if you would want to risk that. I don't think that's something that Vitality is looking to do. Now, there was the Bind, but I don't know if Vitality is going to be, too concerned about the Bind, considering that the Bind also, eventually fell, and you kind of now have a read on it. So I think both teams are going to be willing to say, hey, we saw what you played. It looked pretty decent, but you eventually lost the match, so now we have a good read on what you're doing. In which case, then, Vitality picks the Ascent. They get real comfy on it, right? They're a very, very kind of traditional style team. It's a traditional map. Makes sense. And then Talon, I think, goes for the Bind again, because here's the thing. Vitality's Bind wasn't exactly convincing. So I think that's a good pickup here for Talon. Then you have the remaining 3 maps. I think at that point, for Talon, I don't think there's any reason to leave the Sunset open, as much as it could be a comfort pick for certain players. Just because, hey, if it's going to go down to the wire, I think, again, you've probably cooked something up on Abyss, because it's a map that Primi's already pretty comfortable on, because he's grinding it in ranked, etc. So I don't know if you really want to risk it. Sunset is another map where I do think you have to have a really strong grasp of the map, especially now that it's been around for the whole year. And also Vitality plays the Neon here, where Safe's Neon is making their rotations a lot cleaner. They really rely on that speed, and it makes it a lot cleaner, and it helps their whole kind of their version of the whole check for info, push out, then rotate immediately type of style. So I think you ban that out. Then on, Vitality, their Haven, not convincing in any way possible. Not exactly that much data either. No data on Talons. So why leave it open? You probably ban it, even if you're scared of the Abyss popping up. Then you say, hey, if it gets down to the Abyss, then it gets down to Abyss. So that's my guess. I could see it becoming Haven at the end instead of Abyss if Vitality bans that out. But we'll see. That one's a bit of a question mark, just because both of them, I think, would be fine with either or. But let's work with this assumption. Let's work with the assumption that we're going to see Ascent and Bind again. Now let's talk about what Vitality showed us. Vitality plays the classic composition on Ascent. You've got the Jet for safe, a very comfort role, and then you've got the Omen, you got the Sova KO, and the Killjoy, so they do choose the Killjoy over the Cypher. Now, taking a look at the buy round, we immediately see that one of the reasons that Vitality is going to choose the Killjoy is because they love the default Alarmbot setups in mid. And we're actually going to see this several times. Now, generally, it's always going to be right here in the middle, right above the steps. Almost always, it's in that same general vicinity. It doesn't change places too much. It's not like they're constantly varying it between here and here and here and out here, you know, just to avoid shock dart lineups and things like that. Now, this could also be because it's not like Trace was constantly starting the round with shock darts, but you know, it seems that until you're pressed to really do it, Vitality isn't going ahead of the curve to try to mess up the placement of the Alarmbot and really pressure you. So why is that important? It's important because this is basically the core foundation of how to make a flowchart on defense for Ascent. That's why Killjoy has been the go-to sentinel for the longest time until most recently when Cypher started to add some spins to it. And it's because it basically frees you up from mid. Killjoy can usually set up on B. That, you know, she could set up on tree if she wanted, just to switch things up. But you can usually set up on B. You can have all sorts of variations with your nanoswarms and your turrets on the site just for delay. And then you leave the Alarmbot, and generally the go-to default is right here, right above the steps, because that means that you will know before your enemies, let's just say it's a Phoenix, just to make a different agent, right? Before they get in range to peer in, you know, to take a peek into B site through market, before they can take a peek in towards CT spawn. So that means you'll know here, and then you can have somebody who's free to move around, not at the entrance. So usually it's either the Sova, or maybe it's the Jet. Maybe the Sova's holding here with an Odin, and the Jet can be, you know, helping out here. They could be market. They could be already back here. But usually, you know, the whole point is you're not starting back here, so they could be up on Heaven, over on A, maybe with an operator. And then you have somebody who's free to rotate over, and now they start watching it once the Alarmbot is out of the question. That saves you a lot of time unless they keep breaking it immediately within the first 15 seconds, because then for the first 20 seconds or so, you can have all sorts of set plays safely knowing that you're not going to get flanked around immediately. And if you do, you would know, so then you can start to push out and take other parts of the map. It's just a very, very sturdy setup. I mean, you literally have eyes on mid with one utility, with one piece of utility. It's one of the reasons I think that it makes defense so much favored here on Ascent. Now, why does this matter for Vitality? Well, it matters for Vitality because they're playing the standard composition, which has really good cycling of utility to find information. You have, you know, various ways to buy time on other parts of the map as well, such as the dark cover one way from the Omen, right? And then you could have the drone on a certain timing pushing out, right? Maybe it's from market out through here. You could use it to push out of B, and you could set up an operator, things like that. And then you can really start to close it out, especially when you have the operator. It makes it so much easier. Now, the moment it gets triggered, I mean, no surprise, Vitality is going to rotate over, and then they'll have kind of a flow chart to work off of. Let's take a look at an example from the match against Trace Esports. So this is round 9. This Alarmbot has been broken before in this half, and this time Vitality, they want to push out. They send the shock dart. They're trying to set up the Jet. They want to break the turret and just put some pressure out on B main. But immediately they hear the recon bolt coming out. They hear the drone coming in, the 0 point. Everything from Trace tells them that they want to pressure mid. So then, instead of pushing out of B main and taking a risk, they want to play it safer, as they often do, and they're going to start watching mid as 2. What does this do for Trace Esports? Well, it ties up 2 people. Now, they don't know that it's 2 people, but they do know at least it's 1 because the drone comes out. It actually doesn't catch Feng, and now Feng knows that, well, they don't really have any information, right? And they're going to have minimum somebody, maybe jump peeking here or trying to, you know, jiggle peek here to watch out for mid. It's either that or they have to push out, but they haven't pushed out because my Alarmbot is still alive. So they decide to pressure A, and then Feng digs even deeper. They're like, okay, now there's probably rotates going over. We hear the null command. We don't want to take the risk. It's been smoked off. So we're going to jump in and be able to manipulate the map. Runner not able to get the kill, and overall it opens things up. But it's just very basic maneuvers like this where, because it's so stock standard on how you work around it, now you can use it to your advantage. And who else better to do that than Talon, who loves to change up the tempo, play wacky comps, etc. I even think, you know, the zombie comp actually could work well for this, because a lot of times you can have the Sage Wall blocking off your cross here in mid, just to go for a mid to B pinch, things like that, just to really deny them any sort of information. But again, you know, whether they use the same comp and then switch it up in the rematch against Leviathan, or whether they go for a new comp now and then switch it up, you know, go back to it then, that's up for debate. So first things first, they play very standard, and if you just pressure mid, they will get weaker, and then they start to have to react, and they don't like to push out too often aggressively from one side of the map, right? They're not the type of team that's constantly relying on re-clearing A main or B main very aggressively, so that gives you a better idea of would they have had to rotate or not, and you can really start to push and pull as long as you have a good eye on the timer. Now, another thing I noticed was that when push comes to shove, Vitality, everyone has one, they have their go-to. And what's their go-to on Ascent? It's going to be the mid to B pinch, right? It's not the A short, right, tree pinch into A site. It's not push all the way up mid and then decide what to do. It is simply take mid, pinch into B, and then let's fight on B site. And that's what's going to happen after this timeout, as well as Vitality. We're just going to see them actually pick up the pace. So it is a little bit different in that they are trying to play a bit quicker, but this is their go-to. And it's very good to recognize that, because that means that when you think that the opponents don't really have a clue of what to do, you can kind of set up with expectations. You should still have a backup plan in case it's wrong, but you're going to assume that, okay, this is always their go-to. This is how they, you know, take the wrench out and they get back on track, things like that. So how do we make sure we block it off? I mean, you could try to, you know, block them off in mid, but you could also just wait for them to come into the site like Trace Esports does here, and just shut them down entirely. And again, it's Ascent, so it's not actually that difficult to do so, especially if you're playing the standard composition, because you can really deny a lot of information on A site for almost the entire round using one-ways and 0 points and fragments and whatnot and paranoias. So now that you know this, as long as you can pressure them and you're just keeping tabs on the number of rounds that are passing, right? How many times have they switched up their game plan? Is it time for them to go back to the trusty old set play? Then okay, it's going to be a mid to B. How do we set up for that? Do we catch them in market? Do we block them off? Or do we kind of just trap them in? Are we ready for a flood play coming in from CT? Maybe you have variations so that every time they try it, you throw another curveball. But this is a tendency that we saw in their match against Trace Esports that I think is going to be good to remember. Now, moving over to Bind, something interesting about Vitality is that instead of pressuring Showers very hard or B main very hard as their default go-to, Vitality actually favor the Showers pinch every now and then. Now, it's not like a go-to, it's not their default, but they do use it a decent amount, and they've already used it here once in the anti-eco, and we're going to find something very interesting here, because Trace Esports, they're already kind of set up just near Showers, right? They're ready to kind of fight off any pressure. They understand that they want to keep control of Showers. They want to keep control of the TP as well. You've got, you know, some support available in the form of the Sky over on that side. And they break this trip safely, and now the set play happens. So the smokes come out, the paint shells to make sure that there's no support coming in from backside. But now that they've seen it once, Feng actually just shuts it down, and then Kai regroups. So Trace actually responds very well, understanding that this is going to be another pinch. Now, the reason I thought this was worth mentioning is because since the Blast Pack nerfs in its movement, I haven't really seen anyone make this cleanly from the box all the way in. I don't even know if it's possible. So even just then, you know, see if he makes the jump, but he kind of lands right in front of the entrance, which keeps you in a pretty bad spot, even though that's why he paint shells, you know, right next to triple to make sure that no one's pinching him from backside. It's not exactly the best landing because the other can reposition before you land, and they can actually get the peek on you. Maybe they're inside Showers, unless the pinch is perfect. Now, this also means that if the main force isn't coming in from here because you want to pinch in with the raise over from the actual site, now that means that they're usually playing the fade over by Showers because the raise needs to be over on A main or A short to jump around and get into Showers. Now, that while fade is a great initiator and the prowlers are a great way to actually get into sight and things like that, you do have to remember that they're also playing the gecko, which does mean that at the end of the day, if you had to pick and choose, the Gecko is the surefire sign that this is the execute, not the fade. Again, important to remember, because there are a couple rounds where Vitality will use Trex's fade just for some fake pressure, or just to get information, just to try to draw out over rotates, draw out early utility, especially since they're playing against the Cypher Lock composition, and you just don't want to fall for that. Now, on the defensive side, this is the default setup for Vitality's bind. You got the Viper, who's got the toxic screen over on B through the teleporter to help control showers and also a little bit of delay on B. You got the Poison Cloud, usually on the one way here for A main on the box, but sometimes obviously you could set that up over for showers. You got the Raze and Fade setting up to push out, take control of the orb, react on the teleporter, things like that. The Fade could always get information, set up safe, and then Trex could rotate over. And then you've got the Gecko and the Omen. Now, the Gecko and the Omen, the Gecko, Viper, Omen positions feel a little rough to me, and I think this is something you can exploit. Now, the Viper, it's not too crazy, right? A lot of the Vipers play here so that they can utilize the Snakebite on top of the Poison Cloud. They can still put up the toxic screen for their teammates and then rotate over if need be, if you still have your Snakebite especially. And then the Gecko being here is fine, right? You've got the Molly, the Mosh to delay. You've got Dizzy that you can use, whether it's within hookah or maybe you can throw it above the wall, things like that. And I get it. The Omen, you can jump. You can smoke this off yourself for extra control of B long. You can have the Paranoia to delay. I get that, but there's just not as much strong delay nor strong information on the B side compared to some other compositions that utilize the Viper's position like this, where I think you're just going to always be much slower than you want to be on the rotates. And I think this is something you can really abuse, because either you can punish the Viper for being stuck in lamps early on in the round because there's not going to be any Sentinel util, or you can really pressure B. If you get contact, it's going to force her to really rotate. That makes A lot easier to strike, or if not, then you can just keep pushing in. So that's something to keep note of. This is their default setup. A lot of times it's going to be the early haunt coming out on showers. You can wait for that and you can avoid it. And then I think it makes, again, a lot easier to pressure this. You could probably try to bait out some util from Gecko as well and then deny the cooldown. Multiple things that you could do to really punish this. I think it's especially the way they play it. And I'm not saying these positions themselves are like objectively not great, although personally that's not how I would do it. But I do think there are some weaknesses that you can definitely punish. Last but not least, I want to note that on defense, Vitality generally likes to try to get information, rotate, flood the site. That's their protocol, as far as I can tell. So they're not currently they're not a very set play heavy retake style. They're not playing that right now. And if they're going to play that, right, get info, rotate, be in position, flood the site, this is something you can, again, prepare against. And the stats kind of tell that story, because they don't exactly have the best win rate when it comes to post-plant scenarios. Now, I think it's very impressive when teams have a really dominant retake win rate. I think it's very hard, right? That's why a lot of times the attackers are going to be able to kind of take advantage of the map and have that advantage in kind of dictating the pace. But they're not exactly necessarily on any impressive scale. I do think that they falter a little bit more if the plant does come through. They do have a much more impressive pre-plant win rate on defense when they're able to get the reads, right, get the kills before the plant's able to go down, before you actually give up the full site. So again, that's something that Talon can really use to their advantage. I think Talon, given the way that they play, they know when to turn up the tempo. I mean, again, I always say it, the biggest mistake they've always made is sometimes turning up the tempo too much. So if they stick to their plan and they come up with some comps, I think they can have some fun. When it comes to the compositions on these maps, again, I think either or works. You could use the same exact compositions with just enough adjusted play, or maybe just countering out what Vitality is doing to be able to just overcome it. And then you could pull out different compositions or different playbook against Leviathan, or you could have, if you have something else cooked up, I think you could use that and then punish Vitality. Now plant that seed of doubt against Leviathan for the rematch. You could still play the same maps, and now you have options in whichever comp you choose. They will have had to kind of prepare mentally for both. So I think this is actually a really good setup for Talon, and I'm curious. I do think, at least on one of the maps, if if the maps do go this way, that they would pull out something new. So curious what that composition was going to look like. Now let's talk about FUT versus Paper Rex. FUT versus Paper Rex. Well, this is how I'm imagining that the bans will come out. First of all, FUT, they've always banned Haven and Icebox, or Icebox and Haven, in whichever order possible. That's two of their go-tos. Now, when it comes to Paper Rex, I think... Listen, if Paper Rex picks Haven into you, like, you've done goofed no matter what. So you can probably rest assured that they're not going to pick it. They might float it, but they're probably not going to pick it. And Paper Rex, you know, they like to play Icebox, although it didn't work out well against G2. But that's, I think, because it was G2. So FUT, I don't think there's any reason to ban Haven first. I think you can safely ban the Icebox, which they probably will. And Paper Rex, I think you definitely ban Ascent because you don't like playing it. You know they don't like playing Haven, so that's not a concern. And also, their Ascent is really good generally, right? Ascent's always been a map that FUT has enjoyed playing. So just ban that out, and that kind of leaves maps that both teams like to play. You know, you got the Lotus, you got the Sunset. I think that's a no-brainer. And then Haven's still going to be banned out by FUT, I'm sure. And then it just comes down to Paper Rex. Do you go for a bit of a curveball on Abyss, or do you just say, hey, let's just duel it out on Bind? Neither of us are really that great on Bind. Neither of us really like it. So that's just our third map. Personally, I can see a world where they purposely float the Bind, because I think what we've seen from FUT, which again isn't actually too different from what we've always seen from FUT, should favor Paper Rex a decent amount. As we let some rounds play out in the background here, immediately, if you haven't followed FUT before, you're going to realize that this composition is not really like any other teams. There's parts of it that are similar, like the Breach coming in. Yeah, that's pretty good on Lotus. A lot of teams are seeing success with it. You know, the Cypher, the Jet, Ohm, and Double Controller, that all seems great. But then the Jet on top of it. Because usually if teams are playing the Breach, they kind of like to double down on the whole stun aspect, and they'll use the Neon. But it's going to be the Jet. Why? Because you have CNED. CNED's a great Jet. CNED's a great operator user, so why not utilize that? That's fine. I love that. I love that FUT's doing that, but there is a very hard limit to this composition in the fact that you neither have good info nor great agency to force fights. Just off the rip, let's just take a look, right? Rubble is a very common spot that we talk about on broadcast, on any cast. That is a very important part of this map. And that comes down to who can fight for rubble control better. Now, some teams are better at fighting it, some teams aren't. And if you aren't fighting, if you aren't always going to be fighting for it, you've got other means to work the map. Maybe you have better control over C. You know, maybe you just fast clear that and you rotate. It doesn't matter. But you usually want to have at least some way of pressuring it every now and then. You don't want to just give an important part of the map for free every single round. Well, let's look at what you'd have to be up against. Now, it's kind of not fair because EDG's comp is also just like, there's no going back when you're playing EDG's comp, okay? You've got Clove, you got Omen, you got Fade, you got Breach, you got Neon. No one's watching their back. Everybody's moving forward. Everyone's setting up for better fights. So it's really not that fair for FUT. But also what my point is like, the maximum you could do is you could fault line and paranoia and then dash forward. All things that, I mean, the fault line is on a cooldown, but the other two you probably don't want to use silly-nilly. And also, like, just a single paranoia isn't a great guarantee for this fight, right? You usually want like a seize or a nade or something else just in case someone has dashed forward or jumped forward. So you're already going into this map with a pretty heavy disadvantage, both on defense and attack. So then what about on the attack? What can you do? Well, you have the toxic screen, so you've got the double controller, and that's what we see them use a lot of to set CNED up, right? So we just saw them use the toxic screen to set CNED up for a kill, and then we see them continue to smoke this off over on stairs so CNED can continue pressuring forward. CNED's even going to use the opponent's one way here, right, to get that kill. But it's basically cut up the map, take slow contact, get kills with CNED, then we go where we please because we have better numbers. It's a contact way to play. They're going to play contact. They're going to use their smokes to their advantage. And that's just how they play Lotus, right? Now, they do, thankfully, have a Cypher. And Yenerjay is a very good Cypher. He actually had some good setups over on the C site. He had some good prep against EDG as well, just to make sure he can anchor, especially against this aggressive composition. So all credit to him. You know that they're going to peak you know that they're going to take contact on you. That's the only way they gain map control with this composition. And guess who loves to take contact? Paper Rex. This is why, as much as there's all this doom and gloom about Paper Rex, I'm actually not too concerned, because the remaining two teams in this group, they both love to fight, and Paper Rex loves to fight. This is where they thrive. So I still think, surprisingly, there's a pretty good chance that Paper Rex is actually going to come out somewhat favored. Now, I'm not going to say that they're absolute favorites, like, especially because any team that likes to take contact, they do that because they're good, like they're mechanically very gifted. So it could go any other way. Now, when two teams that love to take contact play, it really comes down to who's just playing better that day. But again, Paper Rex just thrives in this environment. I think it makes them comfortable, it makes them play better. And if you know that they're going to take contact, if you know you don't have to worry about the util, especially on this map where Paper Rex is using things like the Neon, they're still using the double duelist, so they can actually pick up the pace even faster. They can really force the issue. I think Paper Rex should be fine. Now, taking a look at Bind as a possible map as well, here coming in from FUT, you know, they're going to play, again, very similar setups on the default, on the defensive side, but they do have the Brimstone, so it's going to have a little bit more delay power. This is actually a very good round coming in from FUT. I mean, yes, it's their buy round, but they basically use a set play to, you know, take control of showers, but then they empty it and they just fill the site, assuming that if that's the cue for them to come in, they want to fight them. But that's something to note, right? Instead of emptying it because you have the better guns, they're like, hey, let's bait them into fighting us and let's fight better. So again, FUT's always thinking about how to fight. And guess who loves to do that? Paper Rex. Also, I just want to say that EDG's Bind isn't exactly the most convincing map that they have. So if you're not able to beat them on this map, that tells me that you just took fights, and we see this a lot on their attacking side, on their defensive side. Their rotates aren't always there on time. Yes, they have some good plays, like obviously they made it to Champions, so they're still going to have some good round-to-round calls. Obviously they're going to hit some good shots. Yes, they're going to have good setup for each other, but in terms of working the map, it's not like they're always setting themselves up for an advantage. When it comes to the international stage, I've been saying this a lot, but everyone has great aim. It's just about who takes a better position. It's just about who's in a better position more times throughout the match. And as long as you're focused up, then you should be winning. I think that favors Paper Rex because they're also not the greatest at it, but at the very least, they'll just keep up the pace, right? And then if the other keeps trying to match you, then that's where Paper Rex thrives. So now I think Paper Rex will be especially okay if it goes to Bind, which I do think it would only go if it's a third map, if they went back to their harbor composition. Because again, if both teams are just willing to fight, if you're not using utility to control the map, the way that Paper Rex utilizes the harbor to force fights, to take advantage, right, to get into better positions with the Cove, again, even if it's not at a macro level, you're getting into better positions. And I think that's going to help them a lot. Just watching this game between FUT and EDG, FUT is they're willing to take fights. They're willing to take fights a lot of these times. They're not rotating around, working the map. They're not trying to draw out a lot of reactions from their opponents. And it's not, the whole movement around the entire map is not snappy. And it's a lot about setting up CNET. It always has been for this team since CNET joined. So I think as long as Paper Rex is aware of the operator timings coming out from FUT, they should be okay. And again, if it's like Lotus or any other map where they're willing to play, where Paper Rex is willing to play the Neon, well, more stuns, great. That should help ruin the operator just a bit more. So these are my thoughts on what would Chobra do. What would I do if I were part of these teams? What would I prep for? Now, I know the FUT one, we kind of skimmed the surface mostly, but we will be watch partying this live, so I'll be going through it live, talking about, all right, how am I reading the situation? Because I do think this is really just going to come down to a clash of forces for Paper Rex. But the Talon one going up against Vitality, I almost said Leviathan. Vitality, I think there's a real good chance for Talon to hit them where it hurts. So let's wait to find out. This is going to be an elimination match. Hopefully both Pacific teams make it into the decider, so we still have 3 teams in the decider matches. But of course, afterwards, it's the decider matches. Gen G is also awaiting the decider match now against Sentinel. Sentinels just beat FPX to stay alive, so it's a rematch there as well. Just bangers all around this Champions here in Seoul. and I can't wait to follow more of the Pacific team's journey. As always, if you have been enjoying the videos, please leave a comment below. Let me know what about it that you enjoyed, what else you'd like to see more of, and of course, a like on the video and a subscription to the channel would help me a ton to kind of stay afloat here in the jungle of YouTube. That's going to be it for now. If you are able to drop by, would love to see you in the live watch parties, but if not, I'll see you guys next time here on What Would Chobra Do?